This is Olivia McGann, and this is my third submission working with Gala for the Associate Training Programme. To start, I'm looking to establish a nice contact. I'm looking for the engagement of the hind legs and the horse to take the contact down and forwards. It's important not to become too obsessed with what the head and neck are doing. The stretching and the lowering of the head and neck is the byproduct of the engagement of the hind legs. The energy then travels over the back, down the neck, to the rein, and is recycled in a circular motion. Once the horse is engaged, then they will lower the head and neck, stretching into the rein when allowed. If the engagement is not achieved and the horse is simply putting its head down, the horse is working on the forehand and will not be benefiting correctly from the work in hand. So once I feel I have established a good contact and a level of relaxation, then I start to add in the leg yield. Although I'm on the ground, it's still establishing the same principles as the ridden work. I'm asking the horse to yield away from the inside leg, which in this case is the stick, into the outside rein contact. The outside rein is responsible for directing and controlling the energy created with the stick. I like the analogy of a hose pipe. The stick and the forwards energy represent the strength of water coming out of the tap. If you placed your thumb over the end of the hose pipe with a strong flow of water, then you're able to direct the water wherever you want. The outside rein is the thumb that directs the water. If there's not enough energy created by the stick, then it's like having a trickle of water coming out of the end of the hose pipe. In this instance, the thumb cannot direct the water, as it will just be a dribble coming out of the end. When I'm teaching someone how to do work in hand, I break it down into stages. Stage 1, establish the contact with the inside rein. Stage 2, create the engagement with the stick. And then stage 3, control that engagement and energy with the outside rein. These exact same principles are used in the lunging, and then once it's ridden, it's followed in your riding work. The outside rein is the most crucial part. The outside rein is also used to control the shoulders. When doing leg yield, the inside leg, and in this case the stick, asks the horse to yield away. The outside rein stops the shoulders escaping out the side door and keeps the body parallel to the edge of the track. This ensures the crossing of the inside hind in front of the outside hind, which is the first step to lifting and working over the back. ask for shoulder in, again it's the same principles. Inside leg into outside rein. Without the outside rein regulating the speed, angle and forward movement, the shoulder in would not happen. Crossing of the legs would not occur, and the training to improve the horse's gymnastic ability would be flawed. Asking for the leg yield on the right rein, you can see me alternatively using my inside rein, creating slight flexion in the opposite direction from the way I'm travelling, and alternatively using my outside rein to keep her parallel to the fence and stop the movement falling out through the side door and going through the shoulders. Lunging. Her conformation makes it much harder for her to engage her hindquarters and lighten the forehand. I start off the lunge work much the same as working hand. When I'm using the close work, I use the lunge whip handle to tap on the sides where your leg would be used. Always thinking of working the horse from the back to the front. Create the engagement from behind, which creates the flow of energy that moves forward and results in the stretch and lowering of the head and neck. As I expand the size of the circle, I turn the whip round and simply point the end of the stick at the part of the body I want to move. If they fall in through the shoulder, I point it at the shoulder. If the hindquarters are on an inner track, then I will point it at the hindquarters. Her evasion of working correctly is to jog. If she does this, I simply bring her back on a smaller circle, ask for the walk, and repeat the exercise until she walks out with more activity and less speed. Now she's getting to the quality of work I'm looking for. As she starts to relax, she starts blowing out and relaxing her rib cage. The tempo of the walk slows and the swing of the walk increases and the neck lengthens and lowers. As she starts to trot, she is heavy in her footfalls and she's on her forehand. With her on the lunge, the left hind is the weaker of the two, and she's inclined to bring her left hind onto an inner track, rather than lengthening the right side of her body. So I point my stick at the hindquarters to stop her from falling in. I'm also using my rein to ask for inside bend. With the lunge line running through the bit on the near side and over the top of her poll clipping onto the bit at the far side, I effectively have the use of an outside rein to regulate the speed and encourage the bend to the left. Exactly the same as the working hand, asking to yield away from my inside leg into my outside rein. Using the thought of creating a square whilst on the lunge, I ask for the bend, but then straight away release, so the horse has to learn to balance itself and can't lean on the contact. This way, she gradually slows and moves her centre of gravity further back and increases the stretch and starts to work over her back. The positioning of your body and the body language you transmit to your horse whilst lunging is not to be underestimated. You want your horse to work in front of the leg, so you need to make sure the horse is positioned in front of the stick. If you want to make the effect of your stick stronger, you can shorten the rein and then increase the size of circle by walking towards the horse. This is not the same as following the same track as the horse and the same direction, as this results in your body language negatively influencing the forward activity. The horse is then no longer in front of the leg. The use and strength of the lunge line should also be the same as the rein contact. The line should not be loose, and you want to be able to feel the weight of the rein in your hands. You can see the engagement of the hindquarters is improving. The footfalls are quieter and the vertical balance is also improving. Here, I'm playing between the use of the rein and the use of the stick to improve the quality of the work. Using the stick to ask for the engagement and getting her to yield away from me, using the rein to create the bend and the balance through her shoulders. With her, I add the canter quite early on, as the canter always improves the trot. You can see in the canter an exaggeration of the issues I talked about in the trot. She's not wanting to bend to the left, and she's essentially trying to stay on right bend on the left rein. At this stage, she's back to being on her forehand and the vertical balance is poor. When she comes towards the camera, you can see she's motorbiking round the corner. As with the trot work, I keep the stick aimed at the hindquarters to prevent them from falling in, whilst using the ask and release with the rein to encourage the bend and balance on the circle. I keep the length of rein quite short, but keep the circle big by walking towards her with the stick pointed at her. This creates the yielding away from the leg, and use half halts down the outside rein. When she comes back down to trot, the quality of the trot is vastly improved. She is lighter on the forehand and does a lot more blowing out and relaxing of the rib cage. Essentially, using the canter improves the trot work because this work is much harder for her as she's croup high with a longer, straighter hind leg. It takes her longer to work over her at her best. Once she really starts using the inside hind, the moment of suspension increases, the tempo slows, and it creates a nice picture. Adding the side reins. The reason for using the side reins is to add the weight of the reins. They're not there to pull the head in or restrict them. With a horse like her who is croup high, the answer is to get the hind legs more active. By using the side reins, it makes it a little easier to balance herself. By adding the weight of the reins, it immediately has quite an effect on her frame she's giving me. As she comes towards the camera, you can see the vertical balance and the speed is instantly improved by the addition of the side reins. She's curling a little bit behind the vertical here, so I just ask her to move on a little bit and use a bigger area of the arena. Now she's lifted her rib cage. I think probably one tends to take slightly longer on the first rein just because the horse has to warm up first. I'm looking for the horse to give me a good consistent response relative to the level they're working to. That good quality of work usually takes less time on the second rein. For this reason, I always alternate the rein I start on to keep the exercise even in both directions. I'm asked about the horse taking up all the slack consistently in the side reins, and does it matter? It's important to realise that side reins have their limitations. They can never give as good a result as an arm and a soft hand, as they're attached to a fixed point on the saddle, onto a moving head and neck. With a rubber weight on the side rein, it does provide that slight resistance for the horse to stretch into. But a true, consistent contact can only be achieved with the rider and an independent seat. As I change onto the other rein, the horse will respond to the work differently. In trot, the horse's weight is predominantly carried by the inside hind leg, whilst in canter, the leg they strike off on carries more weight. So that would be the outside hind. So Gala's stronger hind leg is the right. So she should trot better on the right rein and canter better on the left rein. As the trainer, I see it a bit like being a personal trainer in a gym where you need more encouragement on one side than the other. I know myself that my right foot and ankle is much stronger than my left. Whilst doing balances in yoga, I'm very stable on my right foot and ankle, but when I balance on my left foot, I wobble all over the place. It's exactly the same for the horse. They naturally take the load on the forehand, so as that transitions backwards and the horse learns to take the load and balance onto the hind legs, it takes time and patience to achieve this. The joints of the hind leg have to concertina down to lower the hindquarters and move the centre of balance backwards in order to lighten the forehand. If a horse starts with a longer, straighter hind leg, then it's clearly a much harder task and will probably take a lot longer than a dressage horse that starts life very up-fronted. As she's working around me, I ask myself, what is her body doing? Where is her balance? The vertical balance is much better now on the right rein. As she comes towards the camera, she's not motorbiking round the corners. However, her horizontal balance is currently worse. By that, I mean she's on her forehand. Her footfalls are heavy, the front legs are quick, the breakover is too soon, and there's no moment of suspension. Having identified the faults she is displaying, my job now is to make that better. So I need to get her to come off the forehand. Contrary to a lot of people's misconception, this cannot be done by lifting the front end up. It has to be done from the hind legs. I ask for more activation of the inside hind. She starts much better on the right rein than she did on the left rein, but she's still not yet working at her optimum. If you look at the vertical and horizontal balance now and keep that in your mind's eye, I'm going to add the canter to see if I can improve the trot work. It doesn't necessarily matter if the canter is of a poor quality. Obviously it would be better if it wasn't, but the canter in this situation is used as a tool to work on the trot. When she was earlier on in her training, I would ask for a short bout of canter, doing it only for a few strides, then see what improvement it made to the trot. If you go back and look at submission 2 with Gala, which is a couple of years ago, you can really see how much she's changed. Now she has cantered. If you look at the horizontal balance, you can see how much it's improved on this rein. I've reached a point that's very pleasing much sooner than on the left rein. She now has the vertical balance and the horizontal balance. I'm looking at her neck and I can see the muscles lit up on the top side. On the bottom of her neck, the muscles are loose. Her eyes are soft. Her ears are out sideways listening. Her face is in front of the vertical, so I'm happy to leave it there. As I start to walk round, I wanted to stretch down into the contact and swing through her back. The reason that a bit is required is it is the stretching into the resistance that enables the back to lift. As your horse progresses with their training, the reins become less important for the steering, and it's more just to do with the conversation and the stretch to communicate with them. The steering, stopping and starting should all come from your seat, weight and your legs. These are the principles you're working towards whilst training your horse. I start off very formulaic. Start with a leg yield, then shoulder in, haunches in and half pass, depending on the horse's training. As I'm doing leg yield down the long side, your horse should move parallel to the track with a slight flexion in the opposite direction to the way you're travelling. Following the same principles that we've applied in work in hand and lunging, the ask is the same. Asking to yield away from the inside leg into the outside rein. Whilst you're riding, you have the added advantage of being able to use your outside leg. The outside leg should be pivoted back from the hip and act as a guarding leg to regulate the sideways movement, stop the horse from travelling too fast and keep it on a parallel line. The outside rein prevents the horse from jackknifing in the middle and diagonally travelling through the outside shoulder. This would obviously have no benefit to the horse's training if it's not crossing over the inside hind. You can see as I come down the long side, I check the response with my outside rein with a slight half halt before I make the turn. My inside leg is asking for the movement across. I'm looking for a good reaction to my aids. If I get the reaction I'm looking for, I move on to the next exercise. I wouldn't repeat any exercise more than 3 times at any one time. I'd move on and then possibly come back to it at the end. I establish my contact with the outside rein before I turn off the track and make sure the horse is moving straight first. I then apply my inside leg to ask her to move across. My outside rein is then used to keep the shoulders in line with the rest of the body. Occasionally I use my inside rein to maintain the bend to the inside, opposite direction to the way I'm travelling. My outside leg is pivoted back from my hips to act as the guarding leg, not bent from the knee. It's the whole leg, predominantly the thigh, that regulates the speed and the degree to which the horse can move across. She's given me a good reaction to the leg yield, so I move on to shoulder in. Again, the same principle as work in hand and leg yield. The inside leg asks for the yield, and the outside rein prevents the horse from running through the shoulder. I use the visualization of directing my tummy button in the direction I want my horse to turn, whilst keeping my shoulders and head pointing in the direction I want to travel. What you're actually doing in this position is using your outside thigh to move the shoulders off the track, while softening and opening with your inside knee. Applying weight down your inside seat bone, all of which would be too much information to process and apply whilst you're learning. So the simple instruction of directing your tummy button makes it a much clearer message to learn and to transfer to the horse. I ask for 2 leg yields and get a good reaction. So I move on to shoulder in. Once I've done the shoulder in, I move on to haunches in or travers. Then I ask for travers on a diagonal line, essentially the same as half pass. Here her hindquarters are trailing. She should be moving parallel to the track and crossing over more. Then I ask for travers on the left rein. Moving up into the trot, I repeat the same formula as in walk, starting with the leg yield. How far you go through the movements depends on the individual horse and rider and their level of training. If a combination is struggling with leg yield, then it may not be appropriate to move up through the levels. Next, move on to shoulder in, then change the rein and repeat in the other direction. The reins should become a very delicate form of communication. If I use the comparison to yoga or Pilates, all the stretches are carried out with some form of resistance, either using your arms or legs to stretch against, or using the floor. For example, the dancer pose. If you look it up on YouTube, you hold on to your foot and stretch and resist against your ankle as you raise your leg. This creates the stretch I'm talking about with resistance, and this is what stretching into the contact of the rein achieves. If I use the half halt down the rein, I always ask and then straight away release and go back to the weight of the rein, so the horse can't lean on the contact. As this particular horse is conformationally more inclined to be on the forehand, she's only too happy to lean on the rein given half a chance. If I want to slow her down a little, I keep my legs wrapped round her to keep the forward impulsion, and ask and release with my outside rein to regulate the speed. I use the 3-loop serpentine to test the response to my inside leg and outside rein, making sure I have an even reaction down the rein without leaning on the contact, with a good vertical balance without changing the tempo. When I'm happy with the quality of the trot, I can then move on to add the canter. Once in canter, she blows out several times, lifting her rib cage and filling up the saddle underneath me. To slow her down and take the weight off her forehand, I suck in my tummy button and use my upper body to keep my weight back, but without creating any tension in my lower leg. It's tempting to try and pull a horse into a shorter frame, but in order to lighten the forehand, I need her to be in self-carriage and to look after her own balance. Now she's blown out and lifted her back up, I can start asking a little bit more of her, adding in the working gaits and sitting to the trot. Now that I'm riding the canter, opposed to being on the ground, I can use my legs to wrap around her and lift up the ribs and activate the inside hind more effectively. With my seat and my core, I'm effectively pulling my stomach in to sit deeper in the saddle and slowing her down without using my reins. I've started to use counter canter to improve her straightness and balance. By using a slight inside flexion, she has to slow down and look after her own balance. So she stops rushing without me using the rein to slow her, which all help her to teach her to take the weight back to her hind legs. When I then changed into the correct lead, the canter is much improved. I really focus on using my inside seat bone as I circle onto the true canter to direct and aid her ability to balance herself. This helps to create the vertical balance. When she circles back into the true canter, she's much lighter in front, and I haven't had to use my reins. She's had to adjust the canter for herself. The lessons they learn for themselves are far better than trying to micromanage and constantly fiddling. As the movements get harder, they need to be confident in the basics. Once I'm on the right rein, I repeat the walk canter transition on a straight line onto the left canter lead. To do the same exercise in the opposite direction. Again, she'd like to lean on my reins to help her balance, so I make sure I keep the contact no more than the weight of the rein, so she has to find her own balance. If I do need to use the rein, then I ask and release again to prevent any tension being created down the rein. On the circle returning to the true canter, I again really focus on using my inside seat bone and make sure I was centred and balanced to help her be centred and balanced. In the downwards transition to trot, I use my seat first, which I do by stopping the following motion of my hips for a beat, whilst pulling my core in. I follow this with a half halt, which is a quick, short backwards pull on the rein, instantly followed by a release. As the horse improves in its training, then the transition should be made from the seat alone, without the need for the reins. The cantering has improved the trot work, and she goes to a good working trot, allowing me to sit to the trot without any dropping of the back. She's now taking a good, positive contact forward, taking the bit forwards in an even tempo with her ears out sideways and a soft look in her eyes and an S swing in her tail. I'm really happy with the work there, so I let her down into a full stretch, which she does without going onto the forehand, and keeps the nice even tempo without increasing the speed. To make the comparison with yoga, any backward bends in the back are followed with a counter pose. For example, the cobra will be followed by the child's pose. This reinvigorates the muscles that have worked, flooding the vertebrae and the soft tissues with a fresh supply of blood. This is exactly why the stretch is so important. Any work done in collection should be followed by some stretching. The stretch becomes the reward. The stretching is the horse's happy place that they learn to enjoy. Once this is established, it's used to get out of trouble. If they get tense, you can stretch. If they get confused with a new challenge, you can go back to the stretch. It keeps their mind peaceful and keeps the work enjoyable as your partner with mutual respect instead of an unhappy slave.